Welcome to the Software Process and Measurement Cast 721. The SPaMCAST is on a 3-week hiatus. We'll be back with new programming on September 25th. So this is the last show in the hiatus series. In the interim, I've asked the SPaMCAST columnists, Jeremy, John, Susan, and Tony, for a couple of their favorite columns. They delivered. Today, we have Jeremy Berriault from SPaMCAST 571, Jiu-Jitsu and Teams. Susan Parente from SPaMCAST 556, Agile in Name Only. Tony Timbol from SPaMCAST 692, Agile Requirements. Enjoy. Remember, if you have any questions you'd like Susan, John, Jeremy, Tony, or myself to answer, leave a voice message at 01-440-668-5717 or email us at spamcastinfo@gmail.com. We'll answer your question on the podcast. Jeremy Berriault, welcome to the Software Process and Measurement Cast.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure to be here.
Jeremy, your QA Corner is one of the things I look forward to every month. And, well, unfortunately for everyone else, what they don't understand is that it takes us about 3/4 of an hour to actually get ready to record, catching up and reminiscing and talking about the future. And so this isn't just a labor of interest in terms of process. You're really a good guy. Hey, by the way, aren't you in the very near future competing in Las Vegas?
I am competing in the IBJJF, so it's Jiu-Jitsu, World Masters, World Championships.
Wicked. And probably by the time this actually airs, you may be done by then. So we'll be looking forward to finding out at some point how it all went. This is fairly intense. So you have a lot of things that you do. You're a tester, you're a test lead, you're a technology leader, and at the same time, you are an athlete. How do you balance all of those things?
Very difficult, and a very supportive wife and family. For the most part, my training actually starts at roughly 5:30 in the morning before I head into work, and then I have training in the evening. So very little sleep, and I get all the stuff I need to get done during the day. So it's a lot of planning as well.
So how does this, and I know this wasn't the topic that we were talking about, but we might as well sort of segue over here. How does having a sport or a hobby that really sort of engrosses you, how does that affect actually your ability to do your work and to focus at work?
I think for me, especially with the sport I'm in Jiu-Jitsu, is more, one, it's an avenue to get rid of frustration and stress. It's also, it just gives me a kind of a different mindset on how to view things. When playing any sport or doing any sport, there's strategy, there's technique, there's kind of gamesmanship and stuff like that, and kind of intertwining all that so that you're good at the sport that you do. It also, you can just frame that back into from a professional and business perspective where you're taking that same kind of strategy, gamemanship, obviously not so much because a lot of people it doesn't kind of frowned upon, but the strategy and planning and training, you're regardless of what you're doing, you're always going to be constantly training. If you're not learning something, then you're standing still and someone's passing you. So that's how I see it. And it helps me get kind of the flow and understanding of how things should work.
Jiu-Jitsu is a individual sport. You're not competing on teams, but you also then turn around and teach other people. So do you find that learning how to deal with people in terms of teaching when you're outside of the day-to-day things that we do, whether it's testing or coding or project management, all of that kind of stuff, does that help or hurt?
I feel it helps. And in jiu-jitsu, yeah, it is an individual. So like I'm the only one that goes on the mat to compete against another competitor. But within the actual community itself, we all have separate teams. Like myself, my main team that I'm a part of, it's called Gracie Homaita. And it's great in that that sort of camaraderie where I will be going down to Las Vegas. I will not have my coaches with me. I will not have any of my training partners with me. But I know other individuals outside of that, like outside in different parts of the world that are part of my team. Once they see the patch on my back, they will be able to help me coach and get me ready for it. I think in doing that, I'm helping others within the team. So when I go and teach, I'm helping the white belts, the blue belts, the purple belts, and brown belts understand how certain techniques work and maybe don't work and how they're working through the flow. And the best part is about jiu-jitsu, and you can use this anywhere within life, is that there's no right answer for certain techniques and certain moves, certain positions. There are definitely some wrong ones, but there are so many different variables that can get you to where you need to go, that it's all based on how the individual works themselves and works with others to get there.
So how does that then translate into the 9-to-5 workplace?
For me, it allows me to have a different viewpoint. It's not I'm not in the full mode of like, oh, okay, I walk in the door, okay, business, or like, okay, planning or project, okay, we got to do this. It's understanding, for me, it's helping understand the individuals, or trying to understand the individuals doing the work so that I can help them do the work more effectively and more efficiently. And from a psychological perspective, it helps me get into a little bit of a mindset on how everything works. It's just sort of hard to explain, I guess. For me, I like how it allows me to see things. Because before I started doing jiu-jitsu, I've done martial arts for a lot of years. And previous to me starting jiu-jitsu, I was doing taekwondo. And again, it's a nice, beautiful martial art. It has its patterns. It has its function. But the way the mindset is when from a competition perspective and sometimes from a training perspective is completely different. And I think with what I know now, taking what I know from jiu-jitsu for the past 12 years, from taekwondo for about 10 years, and then wrestling and karate and all that, and judo, all that stuff I've taken since I was a child. It's more, now I have kind of like a bigger toolbox and a broader viewpoint of the world. And I can take that step back and see everything from a better perspective so that I can get that better understanding.
5 o'clock comes around, people go home. Everyone has a different ritual, but those people that really just check out after they leave and don't have outside interests, as a hiring manager, how do you factor that in? Is that something that you think about?
You ask questions about like, what do they do outside of work? And some people, like, they'll have most of the time, everyone I've interviewed has some sort of hobbies, or they volunteer, or they have some sort of function. Like, no one really says, well, I just go home, sit on the couch and watch TV. I don't think I've ever come across someone that's ever said that. So to me, I think everyone has an outlet. There's enough documentation in the world now that says like everyone should have some sort of outlet, even if it's just hanging out with the family. If you're hanging out from the family from like 6 until the time you go to bed, great. That's awesome. With you're doing stuff, your mind is now, you're no longer focused on work. You're focused on your family. Like for me, I'm focused on my family. And then when I go to my classes and I go teach and I go train, I'm focused on my training. I try to block things out as best I can, and I hope that the people aren't lying to me when they say they have, like they're volunteering or doing other things. But I just don't see how anyone could would just sit there and check out and just kind of sit on the couch and just watch TV. Like, even I have guys on my team that I know they play video games. I know, like, because they're young, they don't have a family, and they play video games. And we've actually had video game nights in the office where this one guy that has video games, that plays them a lot, he brought in his supercomputer. This thing was a monster, and we were doing virtual reality for an evening. And this is what he does to check himself out, so he doesn't have to think about work. So I just don't. There's always something. Something's got to happen.
So how much sharing goes on in a team that's functional? How much sharing actually occurs? I mean, the guy brought in his hot machine to play video games and do AR. Do you share what you do? Is this part of a team level bonding?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, it is. I have shared. I've done self-defense courses for my office during lunch or during a break, sometime in the afternoon. I would say, okay, and like, everyone in my office knows I do jiu-jitsu, and I would just say, okay, guys, you know what? We're going to do a couple of self-defense things for half an hour.
Is that so that people don't, so you can defend, so that people don't bring extra work into the sprint?
It's more to give their brains a break, especially during the sprint. Depending on how overloaded the sprint is, or depending on the work, they're constantly focused on the sprint. We have another individual in my office that she does stretch breaks, and she will put a big broad message out. It's like, okay, we're stretching in 20 minutes, and basically the entire office floor would go into our big common room. They would do stretching exercises for about 10-15 minutes. That's all they need, and then they go back to work. And I find stuff like that with my self-defense. We've done lunch and learns. We've done a whole bunch of other stuff just to give everyone that little bit of a break in between the day. That it lightens the mood. It does actually improve productivity, because we have had some sprints where things have been stressed and there has been a lot of stuff put into it just based from a timeline perspective, and we still got it done. And there was no anger, or there was no one was really burnt out from it. We got ourselves through it, and I believe that type of environment where you're sharing stuff out from your outside world helps them out.
So if we were to put a sort of a point on our discussion on this, team members should have outside interests and should bring those to the office on occasion.
Yeah, even if it's just through like conversation during lunch. It's like, yeah, I did Habitat for Humanity over the weekend. It was great. And maybe it will pique interest for others. Like, hey, do you know what? I've heard of that. I've never done it. When's the next time you're doing it? Maybe I can join it. I know, like, we're going to go play soccer. We're going to go do this. We're going to do that. At least it does have some team bonding. And I think I see a reason. I see a point in it needed to get done. It's just, you're not coming in the office like, I work for company X and I wear their golf shirt and I come in, I do my work, and I leave. It should be, the office floor should be more than just that. There should be a little more camaraderie in between.
I mean, realistically, even if it's just 40 hours, that's probably more awake time with, people than you spend with most of your family.
No, of course it is. Like, I know my work hours. I know I work a lot. Actually, I do more than 40 hours. I know that. And there have been weeks where it's been tough where, maybe I see my wife and kids for maybe an hour in a day. And then I'm off. I have to do some other stuff. Now, That doesn't mean that like I do that all the time. Like right now, currently, I'm training for a big tournament. So my family is very supportive, and they know that even though I'm working long and I do have to train long for longer hours, that I may not see them every once in a while. But they know that once the tournament is done and I fly back home, and I've done this every year when I've gone to this tournament, I take 2 weeks off of everything. Like I don't go to the gym, I don't go do my training. I focus on my family for those 2 weeks. There has to be a medium. There has to be at least an understanding.
Jeremy, this has been fantastic. I think this is something that almost everyone faces, whether they're just starting their career, mid-career, or late career. These are weighty topics. How can people continue the conversation?
They can get a hold of me through Twitter at @Berriault, and they can also get a hold of me through my blog and through LinkedIn. You can do a search for Jeremy Berriault in Toronto. I am the only one here, and you can connect with me through there.
The only Jeremy Berriault. I have been to Toronto. There are other people there. I've seen that.
Oh, there's other people, but there's only one Jeremy Berriault in Toronto.
Jeremy, as usual, the QA Corner is more than just testing. It's all about life. Thank you for bringing your wonderful wisdom to the Software Process and Measurement Cast.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Susan Parente, who brings her wonderful I'm Not a Scrumdimentalist column to the Software Process and Measurement Cast. Susan, it has been a while, and since we last recorded, actually I think people heard you just a few weeks ago on the cast, but we just got done with a 3 set on distributed Agile. Today, can we talk about and I hate to almost do this because it sounds like a setup, but Agile in name only.
There's a lot of that going around, Tom.
Unfortunately.
Unfortunately, there's a lot of it going around. I actually just had a federal client I talked to recently, and I never named names because I don't want to get in trouble. So they're doing Agile. Kind of, sort of, a little bit sometimes, while still doing traditional. So one of the things I did when I spoke with them is talked about what it means to be Agile, what it doesn't mean. Sometimes that latter one matters more. And just doing a tool or technique that's Agile does not make your project or your team Agile. It may be valuable, it may be helpful, but that doesn't mean they're being Agile, or they're using an Agile approach. So, for example, if we have the stand-up meeting, okay, then a 15-minute meeting every morning, people come and stand up. It could actually be in the afternoon, any time of day, but daily meeting. And we have everybody do their check-in, and they say what they've completed since the last meeting, what they plan to do in the next day, and what are the barriers or impediments getting in their way. And actually, that somebody from this client actually said, I think we're doing that, but we're still doing a weekly status meeting. And I'm like, So it's kind of like, how's that going for you?
Why?
So it doesn't go well when you do that. You're actually just added an hour and 15-minute meeting to every week. If you're going to do a stand-up meeting, then remove your 1-hour weekly status report meeting, because you probably don't need that anymore. So that's just for starters. And if you're doing this daily stand-up meeting, that doesn't mean that you're using an Agile approach. So then you ask, well, how do I know I'm using an Agile approach? Well, start with the Agile Manifesto. Does your approach fit in the realm of what the Agile Manifesto says it means to be Agile? And then look a little bit further and look at the 12 principles. And are you supporting those 12 principles in your approach? Now, what it means to be Agile, a lot of people just immediately go to Scrum, and this client's one of them, where they kind of use Agile and Scrum at the same time, and that's not necessarily true. There's Kanban, there's Lean, there's many other methods. So we don't have to just be Scrum to be Agile. But then we want to look at, okay, what method of Agile are we using? And if we're using a method, this shouldn't be like the buffet where we just pick and choose the things that we like and the things that we don't like. And, oh, we like the daily stand-up meeting, but we don't like to use retrospectives. Okay? That doesn't work. Unless your process, unless your method that you're using doesn't have a retrospective. And I would say that all of the Agile methods have some type of continuous improvement, an opportunity to inspect and adapt. It may not be called a retrospective, but continuous learning is really a part of Agile.
Right.
I think that to be Agile includes inspection and adaptation. So that's really what a retrospective does. You look at how you've done things, you look at the work you've done, what worked well, what didn't work well, and then what are we going to do different? That's continuous improvement. And so if you're doing Agile and you're not doing that, or you're picking and choosing the tools and techniques you like and not doing the things you don't like, that's going to be problematic.
Why do you think people do things like, hey, I'll do a 5 to 15 minute stand up every day, and then at the end of the week, let's do the hour-long status meeting? Why do organizations fall into that hole? Or why do they get to the end of an iteration, do a retrospective, and then just not do anything with the information? Which is, I think that's almost worse than not doing a retrospective.
Hey, I kind of. Well, I'll answer the first question first. So why do people, let's say, for example, add a daily stand-up meeting and not remove that weekly reporting meeting? Partially because I think that people want to get on the Agile train because they're scared if they're not on it, what that means. The organization that I was talking to the other day, it actually came from senior management that they said, we want to do Agile. And now the problem is that senior management doesn't understand what that means. And it's not working because they still want to be able to run over to so-and-so and tell them, here's what you're going to do today. They want to be able to interject. They want to be able to make changes whenever, even inside of the iteration. And so there's this scampering for, we have to be Agile because that's going to fix our problems, or we have to be Agile because if not, we're not doing the cool thing, so it's like, why else would you want to be Agile in name only? If that was a bad thing, you wouldn't want to do that, right? You want to do it because that's quote unquote a good thing. That's the right thing to do. We need to be Agile. And so you latch into being Agile without realizing what that actually means. And I think fundamentally, Agile isn't a bunch of tools and techniques. It's principles and practices, okay, which is not the same as tools and techniques. And it's a cultural shift. And that's the hardest part of it. I could teach people a bunch of tools and techniques. I could teach them a method. I could teach them all different kinds of approaches. And at the end of the day, is a culture shift there? Did that occur? And it doesn't occur in a 2 or 3 day training session. Okay, a culture shift takes more than a 2 or 3 day training session. That's not the answer. You can have some really good engaging training, but there's got to be a path forward from there, right, on how to get the whole organization on board. And I think the biggest thing missing is training of the entire organization. What tends to happen is the development teams get training, maybe the project managers get training, which that brings us to a whole nother topic. But what does a project manager do in Agile depends on what method you're using. But that can be really challenging because they may need to change their role. And so the thing I said to this one client is, I think the biggest issue in transitioning to Agile is, what is my role? A clear definition of what is my role in Agile, not what my role was in traditional. It's not going to be the same role, but what is it now in Agile? And that takes education and a shift. The success of that is understanding what your new role is and being able to shift to it.
So you brought up a fundamental flaw in many organizations' ointments. And perhaps you're seeing this in my practice. I'm now seeing second and third, and I don't think I've seen a fourth generation, but a second and third generation attempt at transformation. And people who believe they know what Agile is at the senior levels, and they're the ones who are asking for the status meetings. They're the ones who are tapping people on the shoulders and demanding that they go off and do things that are outside of what was planned for the sprint or even what's in the Kanban flow. How have you addressed getting organizations to recognize that they at least learn what the mindset is, not only at the development level, but at the leadership level also?
Well, the way that I've addressed it with one of my clients, and this is actually a different client than the other one I was talking about, is I've recommended different training for different groups of people, for different stakeholders in the organization, because your executives need to know about Agile, but they don't need to know some of the details, and they don't need necessarily the practice with Agile and even, planning and iteration or doing that type of work. But they need to understand sort of where Agile fits in the world. So I would look to things like the version 1 report. They put out an annual report that is written in a way that's very consumable by executives. It has some real hard data. These are the number of organizations that have adopted Agile. This is what they say the benefits are. There's some really good things there as far as marketing to the organization and getting people on board and people interested. And also, what I find is that training, executives are not going to be available for 3 days in a week, but you can probably do something in 4 hours that at least leaves them understanding some terms, what these things mean. So they're not just using the word Agile like it's the next fun buzzword. I'm trying to remember early in my career, there was a word that everybody used. I can't remember the name of it. So see how well it stuck, but paradigm shift. See, now we talk about transformation.
Yeah.
I just dated myself and you because you said, paradigm shift is the old transformation.
Yes,
right?
it is. Yes, it is.
Yeah, but everybody was like all about paradigm shift. Every meeting I was in, it was a paradigm shift. And now it's all about agile transformation. Agility. We need to be agile. We need to have agility, like in everything. Not just development, but our organization. We need to have agility. That's why I see that it happens. It's that thing, it's the train I want to get on before it leaves the stop because I don't want to be behind.
If you were to give the listeners one or two things to look for to alert them to the fact that perhaps their organization or the organization that they're interviewing at might be agile in name only, what would those one or two things be that they would look for?
If you're doing agile and still experiencing scope creep, you may be agile in name only. If you're doing agile and you don't feel that there's transparency and communication, you may be agile in name only. If you're doing agile and the project manager or project sponsor still gets to say what's in scope or what you're doing or who's doing what, so those are different things that either one of them could say, then you're probably agile in name only. So the project sponsor has a role in an agile project, but they can't dictate how people do things. They're there more to make sure that the strategic business objectives are met. And hopefully you have a product owner or other key customer point of contact who's there to prioritize the work that should be done. If you don't have prioritized work, you're probably agile in name only. It's like a fundamental thing. If you have a list of requirements and they're not prioritized and you say you're doing agile, then can't be, because that's sort of a fundamental part of agile. So I would say look at the Agile Manifesto, and if any one of those 4 values is not there, then you're probably agile in name only.
Susan Parente, thank you for bringing your wonderful I'm Not a Scrumdamentalist column to the Software Process and Measurement Cast. Susan, if people wanted to reach out, engage you, have a conversation, how would they go about doing that?
Well, you can definitely find me on LinkedIn, Susan Parente. Actually, if you Google me, you will probably find a lot of articles and information on me. And you can just flat out email me the old school way, Parente at S as in Sam, the number 3 -TEC as in tech.com. So Parente at s3-tech.com is my email address. And I invite you to find me on LinkedIn, connect with me, send me a message, or just send me an email. I love to talk about Agile anytime, any day of the week.
Super. Thank you again, Susan.
Thank you.
Tony Timbol, welcome to the Software Process and Measurement Cast.
Hey, Tom. Great to be here again. Thanks.
Tony, your To Tell a Story column is one of the fan favorites. Since it's now 2022, the podcast is in, I think, year 16 of the podcast. I think we ought to tackle a topic that probably near and dear to your hearts, but I haven't talked about probably in 12, 13 years. So before we dive into like what Agile requirements readiness is, why don't we just tackle what the heck is an Agile requirement?
Oh, that's a great question. And I've actually had to think a lot about that as I wrote the ebook on Agile Requirement Readiness, Achieving Faster Software Delivery. So an Agile requirement is really no different than a regular requirement. And so the fact that you've got an adjective in front of it describing it simply means that, okay, this software requirement should be now done agilely in an agile way. That's what people are trying to say, but there's a lot to unpack with that, because the issue is not so much the requirement as it is how to take that requirement and convert it into stuff that's actually workable.
So Agile requirements, just like any other requirement, we should get all of those things, pile them up, probably get them signed off, have people throw holy water on them before we ever start anything else, right?
Wrong. And so here's the thing that I was able to work out, which I didn't have a language for until I started to put things together and had to force to write it down. And so it goes back to the definition of, let's take a step back from requirements and talk about scope. So what is scope? Well, scope is an intention to do something, right? And so requirements are a child of scope. And so when you write scope, you got to communicate that at. And so what I figured out is that in the way in which software development works, there's 2 types of scope. There's aspirational scope and there's executable scope. And once I figured out that 2 categories of scope, I realized how requirements can be understood and managed in a way that can support the incremental development principle. The problem with most traditional software requirement development is that it's still stuck in a waterfall legacy mindset. And you got to shift that to an incremental development mindset, but that's very hard to do for folks and how they think about scope and business requirement.
So what's the difference between the 2 kinds of requirements?
So aspirational scope is scope, which is basically the idea or the intent of the business, of product managers or product owners, that is not yet consumable by agile teams. And so converting that aspirational scope into executable scope is the process that we've described a lot in backlog refinement and so forth. But there's a gap between how you get aspirational scope to executable scope, and it's a challenge, especially since the traditional way is, well, let's spend a ton of time building a ton of these requirements, bless it with holy water, and sign it off. The idea is, no, that's not going to work in this new world. You have to do it using the incremental requirements principle, which simply states incremental requirements delivered early have more value than complete requirements delivered late. So borrowing from the Agile Manifesto principle model.
Okay, I buy that. Okay, since we've established what Agile requirements are and that there's aspirational vision and executable vision, when you talk about Agile requirements readiness, what are we actually talking about?
We're talking about an organization getting a sense of good enough, right? You know, in Agile, we talk about definition of done and as a checklist of when a story is done and when it's ready beyond acceptance criteria, right? When it's ready to actually get converted into either delivered as a release or if it's ready to be into development and in production. So Agile requirements readiness is really a mindset where there's a collaborative consensus that the requirements are good enough to start development. And it's a judgment call, but it has to be a judgment call that's collaborative, not authoritative. And because so many of the organizations in the US have moved from an authoritarian model of business to a collaborative model of business, all of a sudden, now you've got all these different levels of delay built into the collaborative model of how ideas get from an idea to actually code. And so those delays, which we've been able to articulate in what I call the 4 C's of delay: cognitive overload, consensus delay, cadence delay, and convergence delay. And so those 4 C's of delay are built into the way people waterfall their requirements. And the way to break out of that is to think incrementally about requirements like you think incrementally about software development.
Before we dive into that, I want to challenge an assumption that you made that basically said that most U.S. organizations have moved away from more of an authoritarian to a collaborative model. I don't buy that, Tony. I actually think that's an Agile pipe dream. Convince me that I'm wrong.
Okay, so when I say they moved from the collaborative model, what I mean is that's what they say they want to do, and that's how they try to practice it. But I agree with you. A lot of those command and control authoritarian practices are still there. But I think a lot of that authoritarian is still at the higher layers, but the middle management layer, by nature, at least in large corporations, have moved more collaborative because people don't want to work under authoritarian models. They want to work in collaborative models. So those organizations which are going to be more progressive and more open, you know, they say, yeah, we collaborate, but ultimately a lot of senior guys still want to be command and control. But the reality is it's a mix. It's a mixed bag.
I buy a mixed bag. How does that mixed bag affect the 4 wastes?
The 4 delays that we talk about. So, and I've got a couple of thought experiments in the ebook. For example, cognitive overload. Cognitive overload means that you could have a team waiting for the requirements from on high to come down. And so let's say you have an annual planning cycle and the product management group decides, okay, it's September, let's build out next year's capability plan for product X. And they take all of Q4 to produce all that material, but they really don't tell the teams what they're doing. They go, well, we're not quite ready. Why don't I show everything to you yet? Yeah, here's a couple of ideas, but they're just not ready. And so what happens is they end up dropping a ton of material onto the teams, and the teams have to then absorb it and consume it. And what happens is that they get overloaded cognitively because that's a traditional waterfall dump. Even though they may have dumped it in pieces, it's still a waterfall dump. And so there's this delay by the time the team understands the terminology, the taxonomy, understands the new concepts, the new enhancements, and so forth. It just creates a delay. So that's a cognitive overhead delay. The other delay is consensus and cadence. In other words, it takes a while for a bunch of folks to agree what is ready. What are the requirements? We got to get buy-in from finance. We got to get buy-in from other folks. And so you get this round robin, Knights of the Round Table discussions that occur, and it just takes forever to get off the dime. And before you know it, you've spent 9 weeks trying to define something that a small startup could write in like a week, and for a large corporation. And then a cadence delay is simply the fact that agile teams are waiting for work to start, but the requirements are coming out of sync. There's this cadence or calendar that the business is working on is not exactly synced to the calendar or cadence of development team, and therefore the lack of synchronization creates delay. And then the last one is convergence, where you have two models of requirements, what I would call formation, where you've got one idea where, we need time to converge on what is the final version of everything. And so that delay in converging all of the different streams of thoughts and consciousness about a particular and new initiative just takes a lot of time. And so that convergence delay is typically addressed using incremental requirements principle or thinking. And now some of those, the 4 C's of delays sometimes have the line between them sometimes gets blurred.
Tony, if people wanted to continue the conversation, wanted to understand more about the 4 C's of delay, how would they go about doing that?
Well, the ebook is available now. You just go to my website at tonytimbol.com and feel free to give me your email, and I'll be free to give you the book. And so that's really the exchange. The price is, I'm trying to build my email list of people who are interested in this topic. And so the ebook is free for anybody who logs in and enters in I want the ebook. It's right on the homepage of tonytimbol.com. And then I'll be literally blogging on this next week on my post and hopefully serializing this. I'm talking right now with one of the blog posts that work with startups of serializing the book content in a series of blog posts. And obviously I'll be talking about this a lot on the column.
Super. So, Tony Timbol, thank you for bringing your To Tell a Story column to the Software Process and Measurement Cast.
Thank you.
In Reread Saturday News, I think you can remember from last week, I'm packaging this show well ahead of time. Therefore, all I can say for sure about the reread is to remember to buy a copy of Coaching Agile Teams by Alyssa Atkins and read along. Link in the show notes. A quick advertisement. Controlling work entry requires preparation and knowledge building to establish a path to control work entry. Magic wands don't work here. If you don't control work entry, you don't control WIP, your flow load will eat you alive. This is why Jeremy Willits and I have developed a work entry workshop. We've recently delivered the workshop at the 2022 Path to Agility Conference in Columbus, Ohio. Rave reviews. If you're interested, we'd love to do this for you. Email us at tcagley@tomcagley.com or willitsjm@gmail.com. Next week, we're back, unless the bears have eaten me. I've been hiking in the Rockies. SPaMCAST 722 will feature an interview with Scott Showalter, Agile Career Accelerator. We discuss the definition of an Agile coach. Building on that definition, we wrestled with how to scale the business of Agile coaching. If process improvement is a never-ending journey, why do so many people ask, are we there yet?